We acknowledge that the lands on which we're hosting this meeting include the traditional territories of many nations. The CFPC recognizes that the many injustices experienced by Indigenous peoples of what we now call Canada continue to affect their health and well-being. The CFPC respects that Indigenous people have a rich cultural and traditional practice that has been known to improve health outcomes. I invite all attendees to reflect on the territories you're calling in from as we commit ourselves to gaining knowledge, forging a new culturally safe relationship, and contributing to reconciliation.
Nous reconnaissons que les territoires sur lesquels nous tenons cette rencontre regroupent les territoires traditionnels de nombreuses nations. Le Collège des médecins de famille du Canada reconnaît que les nombreuses injustices subies par les populations autochtones de ce que nous appelons maintenant le Canada continuent d'avoir un impact sur leur santé et bien-être. Le Collège des médecins de famille du Canada respecte le fait que les peuples autochtones ont des pratiques culturelles et traditionnelles riches, dont les bienfaits sur la santé sont reconnus. J'invite tous les participants à songer au territoire où vous vous trouvez présentement, alors que nous nous engageons à acquérir des connaissances, à forger une nouvelle relation culturellement sécuritaire et à contribuer à la réconciliation.
Welcome, family physicians and residents, to your annual Family Medicine Forum. With the emergence of COVID-19, Canadians have had to rapidly respond to a situation unseen in our lifetime. Family doctors are on the front lines of this pandemic, and you have demonstrated the medical profession's ability to adapt and evolve in ways and at a speed never seen before. You have made significant changes to your practices to ensure that patients continue to receive high-quality care. Already, many of you have embraced virtual care so your patients can safely seek routine health services. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the important role of family physicians. Your patients count on you for information, advice, and reassurance. We will also be counting on you to communicate the safety and effectiveness of a future COVID-19 vaccine. The current crisis has also highlighted a number of challenges in our public health and healthcare systems, from shortages of PPE and delays in testing to encouraging patients to seek care when they need it. The pandemic has shone a light on the long-standing health inequities in Canada that have had broader impacts on high-risk communities. I also know that it has exacted a personal toll on many of you, dealing with the physical and mental stress of a rapidly evolving environment, financial implications for your practices, and worrying about your friends, family, and colleagues. Despite all this uncertainty, I know your patients remain your priority, and I want to thank you for your dedication and resolve in the face of these new challenges. This forum is for you. Make the most of your time together today. Reflect on the achievements and lessons learned from the past year and reconnect with peers. Public health is a team sport, and you are an important member of our team. Thank you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to FMF 2020 Virtual. Bonjour à tous et à toutes, et bienvenue au FMF 2020 virtuel. Please use the top navigation bar to find everything in the FMF platform. Veuillez utiliser la barre de navigation en haut de la page pour trouver tout ce que vous cherchez sur la plateforme du FMF. Visit the agenda and scroll to explore sessions and events. Consultez le programme et faites défiler l'écran pour parcourir les séances et les événements. Les séances marquées d'un symbole de casque d'écoute offrent l'interprétation linguistique. Click on the session tile for more details and use the plus sign to reserve a spot. Cliquez sur le titre d'une séance pour obtenir plus de renseignements et réservez votre place à l'aide du signe plus. If you have a question for the presenter, click Chat to submit. Si vous avez une question pour le présentateur, soumettez-la en cliquant sur Chat, clavardage. Any available polls will be found under the Polls tab. Tous les sondages seront affichés sous l'onglet Polls, Sondages. To see who is attending the session with you, select the People tab. Pour voir qui participera avec vous à la séance, allez dans l'onglet People, Participants. Click Individuals to see their profile and send a message. Cliquez sur le nom d'une personne pour voir son profil et lui envoyer un message. Under Files, you will find any slides or handouts that have been submitted. Sous l'onglet Files, Fichiers, vous trouverez toutes les diapositives et tous les documents soumis. Please click the Session Evaluation button in the agenda to provide your feedback. Thank you and enjoy the conference. Veuillez cliquer sur le bouton Évaluation de séance dans le programme pour fournir vos commentaires. Merci et profitez bien du congrès.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you just joining us, I'm Francine Lemire. I am a family physician and executive director and CEO of the college. It is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. Bonjour à tous. Pour ceux et celles qui viennent de se joindre à nous, mon nom est Francine Lemire, je suis un médecin de famille et directrice générale et chef de la direction au collège. Dr. Iona Heath is a retired inner-city general practitioner in Kentish Town in London and a past president of the UK Royal College of General Practitioners from 2009 to 2012. Our paths crossed when we were both on the executive of WONCA, the World Organization of Family Doctors, when she was a member at large between 2007 and 2013. Dr. Heath has written regularly for the British Medical Journal and has contributed essays to many other medical journals around the world. She has been particularly interested in exploring the nature of general practice, the importance of medical generalism, issues of justice and liberty in relation to healthcare, care of the dying, and violence within families. She is bringing us her thoughts on 2020, the year of practicing dangerously. Welcome, Dr. Iona Heath.
Hello, everybody. I feel privileged and honoured to be speaking to you today. I just wish that I could see you all and that it didn't have to be remote, that it could be real. I'm heartily sick of remoteness, as I'm sure all of you are too. I'm now retired from clinical practice, having worked for 35 years entirely within the British National Health Service in inner city London as a general practitioner. I have no relationships with financial sponsors, but you should know that I am on the board of the Preventing Overdiagnosis conferences. The inspiration for my title comes from back in 1982, nearly 40 years ago, when film posters were horrible, and so long ago that it was still possible to like Mel Gibson. In 1982, he appeared in a film with this great title. He was starring alongside Sigourney Weaver and the extraordinary Linda Hunt, and the film was set in Jakarta in 1965, at the time of the overthrow of President Sukarno, who had been the first president of an independent Indonesia. But none of this is really relevant, because in 2020, this title becomes the year of practicing dangerously. The coming of the COVID-19 pandemic has made this year the most fearful and dangerous for healthcare professionals across the world. None of us will ever forget a year during which everyone involved in the delivery of healthcare has faced unprecedented challenges accompanied by severe physical and emotional stress. Everyone will have experienced at least a degree of fear for their own physical safety and about the possibility of infecting their families and other loved ones. Too many will have lost colleagues, relatives, and friends. And there has been the horrible insecurity of tackling a new, highly complex and potentially devastating disease, compounded by the emotional toll of record death rates. Practice has become dangerous because of loss of life, love, touch, and confidence, among much else. So to start with life. These three, one of mine and two to the south of you, are three of the most negligent, lazy, and self-interested leaders in the world, all presiding over incompetent governments and with no sense of social justice and solidarity. All have death rates way above the average and in the top 7 of the global leaderboard for coronavirus death rates. And it is no coincidence that all had already been working to destroy their respective national healthcare systems. This is from the daily report from the Johns Hopkins Coronavirus Resource Centre. Canada comes in at 26.19 deaths per 100,000 population, with Brazil on 72.89, the US on 65.99, and the UK on 64.83. And here from the UK is the really dramatically increased mortality in poor areas, with the blue bars showing all-cause deaths in the most deprived areas, and the blue-green bars all-cause deaths in the least deprived areas, and the dark blue and green bars showing the respective COVID-19 deaths, with an even greater discrepancy. These differentials have all the features of a syndemic rather than a pandemic. Pandemics imply that everyone faces the same risk, whereas a syndemic acknowledges the synchrony between disease and context, so that some groups face much greater risks. As the science journalist Anjana Ahuja wrote in the Financial Times earlier this month, this crisis has broadly separated us into the exposed poor and the shielded rich. Black and other minority ethnic groups are also suffering a much higher death rate than their white counterparts. This shows the death rates adjusted for region, rural and urban classification, area deprivation, household composition, socioeconomic position, highest qualification held, household tenure, and health or disability. And even controlling for all these predisposing factors, the death rate of the Black population is nearly twice as high as that of the white population. So the difference between ethnic groups in COVID-19 mortality is partly a result of socioeconomic disadvantage and other circumstances, but a remaining part of the difference has not yet been explained. Anjana Ahuja quotes Merrill Singer, the American medical anthropologist who first coined the term syndemic back in the 1990s. It means we have to consider not just biological issues, but the social structural forces that propel disease interaction, population vulnerability, and unequal access to healthcare, including, once we have them, COVID-19 vaccines. But despite this powerfully syndemic nature of COVID-19, rich and powerful people are also dying, albeit in much smaller numbers. Everyone continues to be, and most still perceive themselves to be, at least some degree of heightened risk. In this wonderful 1995 novel, To the Wedding, which he wrote in response to the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, John Berger writes, "We're living on the brink and it's hard because we've lost the habit. Once everybody, old and young, rich and poor, took it for granted. Life was painful and precarious. Chance was cruel." He continued, For 2 centuries, we believed in history as a highway, which was taking us to a future such as nobody had ever known before. We thought we were exempt. Now people live to be much older. There are anesthetics. We've landed on the moon. We apply reason to everything. We forgave the past its errors because they occurred in the Dark Ages. Now suddenly, we find ourselves far from any highway, perched like pigeons on a cliff edge in the dark. And it seems important to remember that this has been the historically normal situation, to be perched like puffins on a cliff edge in the dark, facing death. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was stigmatized minorities who were perched on the cliff edge. Now we all are, although the current virus seems particularly skilled at exploiting almost every dimension of pre-existing disadvantage, systematically picking on people who are poor, old, or imprisoned, who live in overcrowded conditions or are from Black and minority ethnic communities. This is the sociologist Zygmunt Bauman, who died in January 2017, age 91, and he understood about the puffins on the cliff and would have understood the extraordinary disturbances that are rippling through our societies as a result of this latest pandemic. In this brilliant book, Bauman wrote, "We are abhorred by the flashes of reality we have chased down into the no-go cellars of our orderly and elegant existence, having proclaimed them non-existent or at least unspeakable. Death is just one of those things that have been so evicted, hence embarrassment, the trained emotion of shame that makes us dumb when we meet death face to face. And this seems to me to describe much of our current situation. Which brings me to love and its apparent collapse in the face of death and the fear of death. The English poet Philip Larkin reminds us that love must always be more important than death, because what will survive of us is love. In 1946, George Orwell published an essay which he titled How the Poor Die, in which he gives an anecdotal account of his experiences in a French public hospital, which still seem relevant today. However great the kindness and the efficiency, in every hospital death there will be some cruel, squalid detail, something perhaps too small to be told, but leaving terribly painful memories behind, arising out of the haste, the crowding, the impersonality of a place where every day people are dying among strangers. We have been systematically isolating the frail elderly and depriving them of any direct contact with those they love. And we have been preventing any visitors being able to visit those struggling with or dying from COVID in hospitals. My position is this: no one should be forced to die alone, and no one should have to shoulder the burden of knowing that they left someone they loved to die alone. And no clinician should have to bear the burden of knowing they were complicit with this situation. We have to start with this premise and organise our care and our social distancing and physical protection accordingly. It cannot be impossible to achieve, and I am reminded of this from the British Medical Journal in 2001. Survival may be the evolutionary theme of culture, yet it is not the only one. Throughout the millennia, we have sublimated suffering and the dread of death into creativeness and into the search for truth and beauty and love. These concerns made life, however full of sorrow, worthwhile, and they still do. This is the French-American sculptor Louise Bourgeois, then aged 86, in a photograph taken 12 years before she died in 2010, age 98. In her diary, which must have been when she was about 75, she wrote, "You are born alone, you die alone. The value of the space in between is trust and love. Everything comes to you from the other. You have to be able to reach the other. If not, you are alone." And this brings me directly to the role of family medicine in these dread times. Beyond medical understanding and expertise, family medicine has the capacity to foster solidarity and continuity. And the combination of these two fosters love, both love and trust. And the absence of love and trust makes practice more dangerous. Solidarity plus continuity equals love. Julian Tudor Hart had a lot to say about solidarity, which he valued as a modality of love. Solidarity, a belief that humans are all of one species, that we are social animals who stand or fall together, whose survival depends on helping one another, and whose genetic diversity is a strength rather than a weakness, has sound foundations in human biology. The concept of solidarity as a guiding principle for healthcare has its diametrical opposite in the view that healthcare most effectively and efficiently be provided as a commodity traded for profit. Too many of us now find ourselves in a situation where we are trying to provide this essential solidarity within healthcare systems that are becoming ever more based on commodities trading for profit. And it has become so much more difficult to create solidarity, trust, and love just when they are most needed. Solidarity between doctors and patients, between healthcare professionals, within and between societies, and continuity of care, continuity of experience, continuity of thought, and continuity of information across interprofessional boundaries. David Bulger is the head of population health transformation in Greater Manchester here in the UK. And this is his adaptation of the original by Victor Seng, who is a physician scientist in Atlanta in the US. Most of us are currently struggling against the second pink wave, which is producing at least as many cases, but thankfully many fewer deaths than the first pink wave. The green wave will result from the impact of resource constriction and diversion on non-COVID conditions. The third wave in blue is the impact of the interrupted care of chronic conditions. And the devastating fourth wave in red will come as the psychological trauma of the pandemic, the exacerbated mental illness, and the educational and economic injury work themselves out, devastating families and communities. The medical expertise, solidarity, and continuity offered by family medicine will be crucial to the long-term recovery of us all, but it needs courage. As the great American president Franklin Delano Roosevelt so memorably said, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. And I am arguing that that something else is love. I think the American writer and farmer Wendell Berry would agree. Truth, nature, imagination, affection, love, hope, beauty, joy. These words are hard to keep still within definitions. They make the dictionary hum like a beehive. But in such words, in their resonance within their histories and in their associations with one another, we find our indispensable humanity, without which we are lost and in danger. How often have we used these words in this terribly dangerous year? With our patients and with our colleagues, yet without them we are lost and even more in danger. These words need protecting against the ravages of the pandemic as much as life itself, because without them, life is not worth living. So now to the loss of touch, which is so central to the issue of practicing dangerously. Clinicians have been losing touch, both literally and metaphorically, with their colleagues and with their patients. During our first wave in the spring and early summer, I was remotely teaching a group of general practice specialty trainees, some of whom were working in general practice for the first time. And some of them spent the whole 6 months of this first detachment only doing consultations on the phone, rarely on video if they were lucky. Anyone who has worked in the front line of healthcare for any length of time knows that this is a very dangerous way to practice. At last, a Canadian. In this book, with which she won the Booker Prize in 2000, Margaret Atwood wrote, "Touch comes before sight, before speech. It is the first language and the last, and it always tells the truth." This is Henry Moore's drawing of his own aging hands. Touch can reach the newborn and the dying when words are powerless. Years ago, I was the token white person on a small multi-ethnic group from the Royal College of General Practitioners, who met with groups of minority ethnic communities from different parts of England to talk about their experiences of primary care. We learned a huge amount, but perhaps particularly about the importance of touch. We were taught about these three dimensions of touch. The first is ordinary social touch, shaking hands, reaching out to someone in distress, a hand on the shoulder, an arm to support a frail elder to walk. The second is made up of all the variants of the formal clinical examination, which not only contributes to diagnosis, but also, we were informed, demonstrates that the patient is being taken seriously, and so helps to build mutual trust and respect. And the third, which was complete news to us, was touch as an aid to interpretation. When doctor and patient do not share a common language and the consultation has to be interpreted, the patient has really no idea of what the doctor is hearing. But if, for example, the patient is complaining of pain in the left wrist, and while still listening to the interpreter, the doctor simply reaches forward and touches the affected wrist, then the patient can be confident that at least part of their worry has been understood. The simultaneous loss of all three of these modalities of touch has made practice more dangerous. The patient demands our presence and engagement. We are vulnerable to his or her agenda and to the unknowability of what is to come. Distanced by the remote and the virtual, it is proportionately more difficult to communicate presence and engagement, or to elicit the full extent of the patient's agenda and predicament. This is a very old paper, but it was, I think, the first to demonstrate that more than 80% of correct diagnoses are made on the history alone, and more than 90% on history and examination. The full range of investigations serves to clarify the diagnosis in less than 10%. This paper has been repeated several times since, and the proportions have remained much the same despite investigations becoming ever more sophisticated. Yet over recent months, the temptation to jump from history to investigation has been overwhelming, with increased cost and vastly increased scope for finding incidental owners. This is Jean Moore's famous photo from his book with John Berger, A Fortunate Man, published in 1967. And this is Abraham Verghese, professor for the theory and practice of medicine at Stanford. People will say, he or she never listened to me. He or she never laid a hand on me. He or she had one foot in the door, one foot out of the door. It is a failure of recognition of their being and a failure of making use of our being, making use of our sense of self as physicians, as caregivers. This year, people will have understood why he or she didn't lay a hand on them, but the failure remains. Charles Dickens wrote about the power of touch. He knows that by touching her with his skillful and accustomed hand, he can soothe her yet more readily. This is a photograph of general practitioner Dr. Richard Westacott listening to Bill Brown's chest in Devon in southwest England, taken by the English photographer James Revilius in October 1984. Abraham Verghese again. If the clinical examination is done in a cursory fashion, if it is not done with skill and consideration, if its sacredness seems to be violated, then the transformation, which in this case is the formation of the doctor-patient bond, the beginning of a therapeutic partnership and the healing process, does not take place. And these are serious and dangerous losses. On the 30th of July in this dangerous year, the profoundly ignorant and incompetent UK Health Minister Matt Hancock urged GPs that all consultations should be teleconsultations and that we mustn't fall back into bad old habits, thus freeing up clinicians to concentrate on what really matters. With a group of others, we were so outraged that we responded, teleconsultations are potentially dangerous for patients and professionals. It is vitally important not only to be able to listen to the patient, but also to see them and to touch them. Without the ability to examine patients and pick up other clues, diagnoses will be missed or delayed. Teleconsultations may also prevent those who are disadvantaged or in danger at home from seeking appropriate help. Although they may offer convenience for some patients with discrete, clearly defined problems, teleconsultations are incapable of embracing the inherent messiness of most clinical situations. A few weeks ago, I was again teaching the trainees in my old practice, and one of them told the story of a particular patient who spoke no English. She had spoken to the elderly woman's son on the phone and noticed that the records showed that this was the third or fourth time that he had phoned on her behalf since the beginning of the London lockdown in March. On each occasion, a urinary tract infection had been diagnosed remotely, and she had been given a course of antibiotics. The trainee decided that this woman needed to be seen and touched, and she thought it was both surprising and interesting, not to say informative, that the woman came in without her son. She managed to talk to the woman with the help of Language Line and was able to examine her. She was shocked to discover a third-degree uterine prolapse, and we can only imagine the discomfort, distress, and anxiety that the patient had been enduring since March. Matt Hancock may be our Minister of Health, but he doesn't have a clue. In terms of lost confidence, I need to touch on three issues. Firstly, the overriding issue of the loss of confidence in our previous sense of living in a well-run country with high standards of justice, inclusion, and competence. This almost certainly applies more in my country than yours. Secondly, many clinicians, after consulting remotely for months, will have begun to lose confidence in their clinical skills. And this may apply particularly to those working in the front line of primary care, where there is much less immediate recourse to technological substitutes. And thirdly, the pandemic year has accelerated our loss of confidence in being able to maintain a proper balance between these two essential aspects of care. Too much care had already become mechanistic, technological, and transactional, and now this pandemic year has accelerated this gradual dehumanization. Already before the coming of COVID, within the market framing of neoliberal healthcare, doctors and patients had too often been reduced to standardized widgets within bureaucratized and industrialized systems of healthcare. Doctors as units of healthcare delivery, patients as units of healthcare need. The aims of healthcare had too often been reduced to the simple prolongation of life. The importance of human relationships had been almost completely disregarded, along with the importance of serial encounters of continuity. Standardized technical investigations and treatments have been prioritized over understanding, meaning, and what Julian Tudor-Hart used to call the co-production of health. And of course, all of these recent tendencies have been accelerated during this year of living dangerously. As the great sociologist Aaron Antonovsky put it, to be blunt, if one has a very thick skin, the problems one confronts become technical and not the complex ones of human relations. And another great Canadian, Robertson Davis, would, I think, agree. Very few people can be cured by a doctor they do not like. I've touched on just some of the multifarious griefs that are the growing legacy of COVID-19, and which will touch almost everybody to at least some extent. And this means that a new question will need to be added to the repertoire of every general practitioner, something along the lines of, how has the pandemic affected you? The question is the beginning of an attempt to understand and to pay attention to the pervasiveness of grief, the stresses of which have the power to undermine future health. The processing and surviving of such profound sadness have been dependent on culture, ritual, and relationships since the beginning of human time, and will continue to be so. As I have said, general practitioner care occurs in two major arenas, the transactional and the relational, and both are essential. However, the technical and transactional skills of general practitioners have almost no role to play in the support of those struggling with grief, while a strong one-to-one relationship of mutual respect and trust can be immensely powerful. Relationship building is an investment that has the potential to make future care easier for both patient and practitioner, and the posing of this pandemic question that I'm proposing can be a way not only of beginning, but also of strengthening a therapeutic relationship. In this context, it will be very important to resist the temptation to pathologize, label, or precipitately refer on the sequelae of grief, because all of these undermine the potential of using shared understanding to cement a relationship. We must hope that one of the few positive legacies of the pandemic can be a rediscovery of the power of therapeutic relationships within a constant context of personal continuity of care, much of which has been so destructively undermined by health care policy over recent decades. Other possible harms that we can hope for, work for, and even vote for are renewed support for social justice, more support for green policies, and a genuine political commitment to address the devastation of climate change, and a more cautious approach to screening, and so less overdiagnosis. The urgency of caring for the victims of COVID-19 has postponed much of the routine, target-driven care of patients in general practice. We have an opportunity of only reinstating those aspects of care where the benefits clearly outweigh the harms. All the indications are that patients and professionals remain committed to socially responsible healthcare systems based on solidarity rather than the pursuit of profit. Can we be convinced that politicians in your country and in mine are similarly committed? The title of this painting is An Escort to the Big Workplace in the Sky, and you can see death waiting outside the window. It is by the New Zealand artist Trevor Moffat. It was painted in 1980, and it is of his dying father, who had been a very tough old manual worker. Another famous Moffat painting of his father is titled No Son of Mine Goes to University. Thankfully, Moffat Sr. died in 1980, and so his last days were not spent alone in a room, deprived of visitors and love and touch. For the sake of everything we hold sacred, let us start with this presumption that no one should die of COVID-19, or indeed anything else, isolated from those they love and who love them. If we can agree to this, then we can approach the care of seriously ill people from a completely different perspective. Such a commitment is surely not beyond the wit and resources of a nation. Fewer people admitted to hospital, much more support at home and in care homes, testing for those who want to be with their loved one, and physical isolating after any risky contact. So I want to finish with words from the Tasmanian writer, Richard Flanagan.
There was birth, and there was love, and there was death, and there were only these three stories in life and no others. But there was also this noise, this endless noise that confused people, making them forget that there was only birth and love, and that each and everything died. In this year of practicing dangerously, there has still been birth and there has been too much death, but there has been a deafening amount of noise, confusing and distressing us all. Now, we all of us share the responsibility for creating quieter, more peaceful times in which life, love, touch and confidence can once again flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Heath, for this excellent presentation. I'm sure that we would agree that many of these thoughts that you've mentioned are, certainly very timely and important for the current situation. And I'm sure that many of us would agree with many of these points that you've made. I would like to take this opportunity to ask you some of the questions that the audience has brought up, if that is okay. I think I'll start with the first question here. So most recently, we actually had completed a survey by the CFPC among our membership, which showed that four-fifths of our visits are now virtual. Now, the majority of these visits have been phone calls. I'm just wondering if you have noticed the same trend in the UK, and if this has changed since the spring. How much do you anticipate this change will be permanent, and what do you anticipate to be good or bad about this?
Well, I think I've tried to explain some of why I think it's dangerous for it to continue at that level. One of the things I didn't mention is the burning issue of confidentiality. Because when you're on a phone or a video call to a patient in their own home, you have no idea who else is listening, no idea who else is in the room. And I think that that can be extraordinarily inhibiting to the patient. Imagine if the elderly lady I was talking about with the prolapse had been consulting from a room with her son and her son's family present, young children. She couldn't, even if she could speak English, she couldn't possibly have talked about this issue. And I think we have to be extremely sensitive to these possibilities. And I also think there's a grave risk of us de-skilling ourselves with the knowledge that is in our hands, the knowledge and skill that is in our hands, that we have developed over years, over a whole career in my case, and which fades quite rapidly when not used. I don't think it'll be permanent. I think there is a need for people to be able to relate closely to their primary carers, including their family physicians. There will clearly be, there's always a pressure from industry. There's now a huge industry around providing the means for virtual interaction. And I think there are some political advantages for those in power, but I think the overwhelming human impulse will triumph in the end.
Awesome. Thank you for the answer here. Since you along kind of this line of conversation, I was just wondering if you can comment a little bit on medical education as well. Can you tell us a way that maybe family medicine teachers can demonstrate and support the principles and concepts you've outlined in this presentation for the next generation of family physicians, and especially the piece around the doctor-patient relationship that's so central to our discipline?
I think the doctor-patient relationship is, the power of the doctor-patient relationship is pretty obvious to young family physicians from a very early stage. I'm getting a... Can you hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can still hear you.
Peter, you can still hear me, thank you. Because I could mute my video if it does, start delaying. So I was saying that I think the power of the relationship becomes pretty clear to young doctors in training very early on, as they begin to be able to have serial encounters and realize how much things alter when they are seeing somebody more than once. A friend of mine, a Norwegian family doctor, once said to me that, you know, the first meeting with anybody is different from the 10th meeting with that same person. And that it's true for any human relationship. It is certainly true for the doctor-patient relationship. The major threat to young doctors being able to develop this understanding and expertise is when systems are organized to minimize continuity of care, when access becomes more important than continuity. We have to enable young doctors to experience continuity and its power. And that's in the organization of training practices.
Thank you for the answer here. I have another question here. Should family medicine reorient its energies and its focus towards helping our patients navigating dying rather than contributing to the current medical orientation to delaying and denying death? What do you think this would look like?
I've written about this extensively, and it is absolutely a question of balance. I think, you know, when medicine is still pursuing a cure in an acute situation, the transactional elements always triumph over the relational. If I'm unconscious, I don't care who's intubating me or whatever. But as soon as medicine has run out of answers and the transactional has less and less to offer, then the relational must take over, must be enabled to take over, because of the need for support and understanding and finding meaning and all the things that are involved in the care of the dying. I certainly don't think we should be writing people off, but I think one of the things I thought just today as we go down into our second lockdown is that this fear of death associated with COVID-19 has really undermined our, I think, previous sense that how we live matters more than when we die. We've become so obsessed with avoiding deaths that we are creating such havoc in the lives, particularly of children and young people, which I find quite appalling.
And so, you know, kind of speaking along the lines of children and youth, can you comment on some of the impact that the pandemic had on children and youth?
Well, I've got three grandchildren. Four. I've got. Oh my goodness! So stop it. Sorry, that's my phone. Hide it. Four granddaughters at school at the moment, and. Oh, sorry, David, can you come and take away my phone? Sorry, talk about unprofessional, that's me. I've got these four granddaughters and it has been devastating for them. Two of them missed their last year at primary school with everything that you get in the last year of primary school. You go on a journey, you do a play for the school, you have a party. They had none of that, and they were both very upset about that, and it is a form of grief. And then another one had done 1 year at secondary school and then missed almost the whole of the second year at secondary school, very uncertain about her friendship network and whether it was secure enough, and not knowing what was happening and who was saying what to who, and incredibly stressful. And I think that they have been really disturbed to a greater or lesser extent. And then we have, you know, young people going to university and then sitting in a room and just having online Zooming all day, no possibility of socializing. And I mean, I think it's devastating, and I think it really should not be minimized. I think I think there will be, in that graph, I can't remember which line it was, the green, red line, the long-term consequences of this sort of neglect of the fundamentals of human society is going to play out over many years.
Perfect. I can certainly resonate that thought, as I'm currently in a community with 2 large universities, and it has certainly been a big change for our community. I want to ask you if you had any advice on how can we increase our capacity for in-person assessments, given the physical distancing limitations now brought on.
How can we do this? I think that we need a much more sophisticated assessment of risk. I think clinicians have not fully taken on board the risks of other diseases if people are not allowed to present in person. And I think that we need to be assessing risk for our patients and for ourselves on a much more individual basis. And I think if we were to do that, there would be many more opportunities which we should take to see people in person. Just take the case of the poor, unfortunate old woman with the 3rd degree uterine prolapse. She would risk COVID to be able to have that recognized, diagnosed and treated, because it was such a horrible position to be in. So we're not balancing things. The only thing you're not allowed to die of at the moment is COVID-19. You can die of anything else. It doesn't really matter, because it's the COVID-19 deaths that are all ranking the nations. And we need to be more sophisticated, more sensible, more wise about how we're distributing our time.
Perfect. So we still have about 15 minutes away till the 11 o'clock. If there's any other questions, please feel free to post it in the chat.
Yeah.
Here's another question for you. Do you feel like fee-for-service care is stifling innovation during COVID-19?
It's difficult for me to comment in the Canadian context. I think fee-for-service, as a general rule, needs to be employed with great care, because it tends to slant. It tends to slant the playing field, to use a well-known cliche. It tends to advantage the people who need the care that is being fee for service over people whose needs are not being fee for service, and therefore tends to undermine justice. So I think it's very difficult, and particularly it will be difficult if and when we ever get a COVID-19 vaccine, and I'm not too sanguine about that, given we're still waiting for an AIDS vaccine. But if we do get a COVID-19 vaccine, I imagine it will be offered with a fee for service to try and increase uptake. And I think only had a scandal in the UK when patients did not realise that their doctors were being financially incentivized to promote vaccination. And it created a considerable backlash. And I think that that's an example of that we need to try and think ahead about what we think about a fee for service for giving COVID-19 vaccines. There will be a lot of people who want them. There will be other people who we already know think there's a conspiracy to poison everybody with vaccines, which is extremely crazy. But we need to be very, we need to think it through. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I do want to bring kind of our conversation back to the humanities a little bit here as well. I guess, in your opinion, should and how could family medicine take a lead in rebalancing human interactions, especially in frontline care?
Well, I mean, that was very much one of my themes. I absolutely acknowledge that we are not physicians if we are not on top of the transactional and technological and knowledge-based side of our practice. That is absolutely essential, or we are frauds. But we also must cultivate the relational and the human aspect, because it is our role in sustaining that relationship and building relationships of trust and respect that make healthcare possible. I love that Robertson Davies quote that few people are cured by a doctor they do not like. I mean, that really it needs thinking about deeply. And I once heard a wonderful, well, it wasn't particularly wonderful, it was a talk by an American expert on litigation in healthcare. And he said, and it's stuck with me ever since, that the people who sue their doctors have decided to sue their doctor even before anything goes wrong, because they've decided that that doctor is arrogant, doesn't listen to them, doesn't care about them, doesn't respect them. So they're looking for something to go wrong, and then they will go for their revenge. It's our ability to build relationships, and it's the great joy of family medicine. The relationships we build over years with individuals and families, over generations, and how they surprise us and amaze us and distress us, and how we struggle to understand them, and the remarkable extent to which the humanities, literature, music, poetry, art help us in that to achieve that understanding of individual human predicaments. It certainly helped me.
Perfect. So thank you for answering these questions. Keeping in mind the time, I think we will move on. I just want the audience members to know that these questions will be up and accessible to Dr. Heath over the next 30 days. So please do feel free to post the questions, and she'll be able to check them intermittently and then respond to those questions. I will now pass the mic to Dr. Kathy Sermon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Heath, for your wise words. And I'm so glad this has been recorded so I can go back and watch it again. There was so much in such a short time. I learned a new word, syndemic, that has given us the exposed poor and the shielded rich, and that the fight for social justice, solidarity, trust, and love has to be part of our response to the COVID syndemic. And you reminded us of how touch is central to our well-being as humans and our practice as doctors. Merci, Dr. Heath, d'avoir partagé vos expériences et vos perspectives importantes avec nous. I'm Dr. Kathy Chervin, CFPC President for 2020 to 2021. Je suis Dr. Catherine Servin, présidente du Collège des médecins de famille du Canada pour 2020 à 2021. And at this time, I'm delighted to announce that Dr. Heath is our TD Insurance Spotlight on Achievement Award recipient. J'aimerais annoncer que Dr. Heath est la lauréate du prix Plein Feu sur les réalisations TD Assurance. The TD Insurance Spotlight on Achievement Award is bestowed upon an outstanding national or international figure who has contributed significantly to medicine, family medicine, the health and well-being of the population in Canada or around the world. This is a program of the Foundation for Advancing Family Medicine through the generosity of foundation donors and the TD Insurance. Congratulations, Dr. Heath. I wish we were in person. I wish I was able to shake your hand and maybe give you a hug. This concludes our keynote address, and
I just wanted to say thank you, and I'd accept a hug. Thank you.
Yes, virtual hug. So this does conclude our keynote address. Thank you all for attending. We invite you to take a break, participate in the special events, visit the posters, the exhibit hall, and please join us again at 11:30 a.m. for more thought-provoking sessions. And please also join us for the President's installation, that would be me, at 12:30 p.m. today. It's short and I think it will be fun. I can promise you pets and a family video. And remember that our awards gala happens this evening at 7 p.m. and all of these times are the Eastern time zone. Have a great day. Bonne journée à tous.